Now, as we move on, coalition governments in the country have made headlines for all the wrong reasons. In the last 2 months, Gauteng DA-led coalition metros such as the city of Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni have both faced challenges, with mayors being voted out. As a result, the Democratic Alliance has proposed a number of laws to govern coalition governments in the country. For more on the DA's coalition proposals, I'm joined by Siviwe Gwarube, who is the party's chief whip. Siviwe, very good afternoon. I appreciate your time today. Your proposals, are they results of the challenges that you are facing in the coalition governments in which you are leading at the moment? Hello, Siviwe, are you there?
Hi, Hugo. Thank you very much. I'm saying if you look at any consolidating democracies around the world in which coalition governments are a permanent feature of their politics, you see that, in fact, there are laws that govern how coalition governments should work. And that we should not be any different. We have seen coalition governments since 2016 in South Africa, and we can see, well, since the first one being the city of Cape Town back in 2006, but we have seen an uptake in coalition politics since 2016. And so, it then stands to reason that in order to protect the ordinary citizens who become the real victims of failed coalition governments, who don't get the services that they need, we need to then start thinking as the National Assembly about how do we craft laws that will guide coalition governments in the future. Secondly, the most important thing, Hugo, more than the challenges that are being faced now at a local level in metros and the like, what we need to do as Parliament is we've got to have a focus in the future. If the research that we are seeing indicates that the ANC is unlikely to conjure together a 50% majority in 2024, there's a very high likelihood that we may find ourselves in a national or even provincial coalition government. The instability we've seen at a local level cannot be replicated on a national level. And that is why it's important that we as Parliament start to think about how would we make sure that a coalition government at a national level or even a provincial level is protected from instability. Can you imagine the chaos, being a president on this day and then finance minister, and 3 months later that government is voted out in the motion of no confidence? That kind of instability, while it's democracy at play, is not good for the people, and it's not good for service delivery.
Now, Siviwe, let's talk about the current landscape versus some of the proposals that you are making. Where would those differences be? I know that the one area that you've certainly talked about is that the coalition agreements must be made public to a very large extent. This allows for a certain amount of accountability because the stakeholders or the voters who voted these individuals into office are able to hold them into account.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we have studied when we looked at international best practice, in fact, when we looked at the Kenyan model, you see that Kenya has developed a model in which, one, they have established an independent registrar that becomes basically the secretariat of coalition governments and the coalition agreement. And so that's quite important, Hugo, because one of the things that we've seen actually in the collapse of some of these governments is the fact that the negotiations become intensely political, and the considerations are mostly about what position will I get, and horse trading of that nature. Our view is that once you depoliticize that, you stand a far greater chance of making sure that some of these coalition governments do stand the test of time. The second thing is ensuring that the agreement, the coalition agreement that parties are party to, is binding, is codified, and is in fact looked for after by the independent registrar. So it's not one political party that is seemingly the class captain of all the political parties and managing the coalition governments. It's an independent, apolitical registrar that will be essentially the one that's responsible for looking after the implementation of that agreement. And then lastly, I think, which is something that is something quite prevalent, in European democracies is the introduction of an electoral threshold. And what that protects and protects a government from, Hugo, is that if you are able to put together a 2% nationally, then you're a party that is able to be party to a coalition government. The reality is that proportionality and representation is important, but ultimately when you've got one-seat political parties, Hugo, who are able to shift from one party or one coalition to the next and actually have in their power the power to collapse the government, that is also what brings instability. So our view is that if we can pass these three things in particular, and obviously looking at the Municipal Structures Act as well to strengthen the governance there at the local level, but these three key proposals, our view is that, and if it becomes law, we can start to see coalition governments working for the people instead of working for the politicians.
Now, coalition governments, I'd like to believe, by nature, should really offer tighter controls and checking mechanisms on various political parties. In your experience, has this been the case in the current setup in South Africa?
In terms of an ability to have checks and balances within a coalition government?
Correct.
Well, look, I mean, they've been less than ideal because, of course, what you really would want, Hugo, is and I think this is why perhaps many South Africans have not given any one party a majority in some of these metros that we've seen, that people are starting to feel as though, well, you know, perhaps if you co-govern, then you can hold each other accountable and we can see a lot less of what we've seen in the past, rampant corruption, the lack of service delivery. But the reality is that we've also had the unintended consequences of having people in government who are not interested in governing, who are there because they've got a couple of seats that are needed to bring the government together, and who are mostly concerned about, which political party is going to offer me a make-or position, which political party will be able to offer me perks. That's why I'm saying that codifying and making coalition agreements binding is important. Because ultimately, politicians, Hugo, can't be negotiating on the basis of what they're able to get from the fiscus. We should be negotiating on the basis of common principles and common values, and ultimately the commitment to serve the communities that have elected us. And so we've not quite seen that checks and balances currently in the current formation, as I said, because some of these governments are dogged with people who aren't necessarily keen on governing, but who are simply there for self-interest. And that's why our view is that Parliament can't sit idly while we are 18 months away from a national election, and there's a very real chance that we may have a national government coalition, and so we've got to be prepared, and we've got to be prepared in terms of legislation.
Now, Siviwe, something that's been a thorn in the side of the DA has been the frequency of motions of no confidence. And you have a plan up your sleeve for this?
Yes. So, one of the things that we are looking into particularly is the legality around limiting the frequency of motions of no confidence. Because, of course, in a constitutional democracy, you don't want to snuff out the ability for people who are represented in council or legislature or parliament to be able to move a motion of no confidence against the government or against the president. You want to protect that. But these motions of no confidence are often used as a political tool, and sometimes they're used as a way of for extortion, where people say, well, if you don't give us these positions, we'll move a motion of no confidence against you. And here is the problem with the frequency of motions of no confidence, is that if you are consistently removing government from office in 3 months, that government is not able to pass a budget and deliver services against that budget in a way that citizens can hold that government to account. And that's a problem that we are finding, particularly at a local level. But I want you to cast your eye further to 2024. Can you imagine a scenario where national government is in government for 6 months and then not again? And can you imagine the impact on the economy international investments and the like. And so we're exploring the legality of saying, let us limit the frequency of motions of no confidence so that at least we don't see this harsh halting of service delivery that we are seeing every day. Because citizens actually don't deserve that. They don't deserve a situation where, a government was starting to build something there and repair certain things, and then a whole different government comes on board every third month. And so, again, like I said, it's important to protect the principle of being able to remove a government and hold it accountable, but we've got to start having a conversation in South Africa around the legality of limiting the ability to essentially hold councils and parliaments to ransom by the frequency of motions of no confidence.
Siviwe, I appreciate your time this afternoon. Siviwe Gwarube, Chief Whip of the DA, in conversation with us around some of the proposals that the DA is making around laws to govern coalitions.